Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, The Future of Psychometrics in Online Assessment. My name is Maria, and I'm very happy to be your host today on behalf of Certified Assessment Solution. As we all know, technology is transforming the way we assess skills, knowledge, and performance. And today's topic is particularly important because it explores how psychometrics, the science behind testing and measurement, is evolving in the digital era to ensure assessments remain fair, valid, and reliable. We are joined by two amazing speakers who bring deep expertise and practical insight to the discussion. We have Darko, an assessment and measurement specialist whose work focuses on the intersection of psychometrics and technology, and currently he is working both as an evaluator of the field psychometrician and an evaluator within the field psychometrist. He focuses on teaching, designing, validating assessment tools, both digital and paper-based, as well as developing automated scoring system that enhance fairness, reliability, and efficiency in testing. And joining him is Giuseppe, Managing Director at Certified Assessment Solutions and ITTS. So Certified Assessment Solutions specializes in delivering innovative, secure assessment and invigilating solutions designed to meet the evolving needs of educational institutions, awarding organizations, and businesses worldwide. The most important thing, certified platforms are Smartest Examiner, Nexus, and Invigilate. And a quick word about ITTS. ITTS focuses on delivering technology-driven training and testing services that help organizations to enhance their assessment and certification. So he is the one who will be leading today's discussion. And thanks a lot for both of you joining us today. And at this point, I will be hand things over to Giuseppe, who will be guiding the conversation and posing some key questions to Darko about the evolving role of psychometrics in online assessment.
Thank you, Maria. Just one thing there, qualifying note. I'm not by any means am I an expert in psychometrics, but I certainly have a curiosity for it. Every time I go to, one of the industry roadshows and so on, I'm always attracted by the talks, the presentations on psychometrics. And then invariably I go in being very curious and I walk out afterwards not having understood that much because it was kind of way over my head. But let's say that I know enough to have been able to put together some questions for Darko, who is the expert. So Darko, you just woken up. Where are you, in Toronto?
Yes, I'm in Toronto. Yeah, just rolling out of bed, fully caffeinated.
All
So
right.
I'm ready to go. I'm excited.
So you haven't had a chance to play with snowmen or anything because I believe it snowed there as well. You got plenty of snow.
Not yet, not yet. I got to wait a little bit to start rolling the snow, but there's going to be a lot to work with this winter for sure.
Yeah. Right. Okay, well, look, let's just cut to the chase. I have like 6 or 7 questions for you. I think we have around 40 minutes or so. Now, I think the questions fall broadly under 3 categories. The first being, the current status, the current situation with regard to psychometrics within the digital testing scene. The second one is actually looking ahead. And then thirdly, some insights that you can give us. And, I think the last question I can see here is particularly close to my heart because, it concerns our own authoring and test delivery solution and, which direction we should go in. So I'm looking forward to that. So, if I could begin, first of all, let's ground psychometrics within the digital assessment scene. So, what do we mean by psychometrics in an online assessment context?
So, yeah, within these questions, I'll try to keep it fairly broad and try to address as many points as I can here. It's very easy with psychometrics to go down a rabbit hole and into the weeds.
Yeah.
So if I'm getting too technical, just bring me back, just let me know. But I'll try to sort of touch on those things because the technical aspects are quite interlinked. But why don't we just start with psychometrics within the digital age, within the perspective of kind of this online ecosystem. And when we talk about that, when we refer to psychometrics within kind of the digital age or a digital ecosystem, we're kind of introducing this application of measurement science within that digital system. So for a long time, psychometrics was just focused on ensuring, test reliability and validity, which is important under kind of standardized in-person testing conditions. And what the online scope has done is it's allowed to broaden that scope. So, it kind of requires us to think about the digital interface and the test taker experience in terms of authentication and the influence of technology on the performance itself. So that's one thing that I find tends to get overlooked as well is how the delivery systems themselves can kind of shape and change the user experience. And so there's been this, I think for me, a noticeable shift from kind of the panoramic to the personal within psychometrics. And in a lot of ways, it's become more dynamic, right? So modern psychometrics kind of now incorporates models that just go beyond, here's where the more technical stuff comes in. It goes beyond classical test theory and moving more towards adaptive and diagnostic approaches. So you have things like item response theory that remains pretty foundational, but also newer frameworks like multidimensional item response theory and cognitive diagnostic modeling, which essentially are just fancy ways of saying that it makes it possible to map the mastery of these latent and discrete skills and learning progressions rather than a single static ability. So as opposed to just being able to measure reading comprehension, we can measure domains within reading comprehension, like inferences and how well a test taker sort of extracts meaning from that text and their fluency. And so these digital administration methods come with automated scoring, real-time analytics that are kind of baked within them. And of course, which we'll get into, the AI-driven tool sets, which have transformed how test data are analyzed and interpreted.
Mm-hmm.
And where psychometrics once worked with limited data points, online assessments and digital assessments certainly now generate sort of more rich process-based data, and it doesn't just focus on information about what answers test takers choose, but how they arrive at them. So it goes from a what to a how, and it kind of creates more layers within which we can sort of build kind of a richer experience and extract more meaning, things like response times and hesitation patterns. I feel like you have a question. Go for it.
No. My question was, how can that data help people to learn and perform better?
Right. So because of the evolution of the new responsibilities, psychometricians and data scientists sort of now have to ensure that fairness and accessibility and transparency are sort of baked within those digital ecosystems. And so the whole process of validating not only test content, but also the platform itself sort of mitigates those effects. And to your question, it can help people perform better and test takers perform better because the way that things are evolving is in a way that allows test takers to experience more real-time feedback and real-time support. And so with newer technologies and the way that adaptive tests are designed, the questions will either they'll be calibrated to the test taker experience, which sort of eases them into this support system in a way that allows them to kind of really get a handle on what their own abilities are by adapting those kind of real-time calibrations within the test itself. So our job as psychometricians doesn't just end at creating a test, but it sort of goes beyond that in terms of learning about the test taker.
Right. That takes me to my next question. Adaptive and personalized assessment. Adaptive testing is often described as personalized or dynamic. From your perspective, what's happening behind the scenes when a test adjusts to each test taker's ability in real time?
Right. So that's an area that is becoming increasingly the area of focus, and I think is the area that is the most sort of resource intensive in terms of what people are really harnessing and focusing on. So adaptive testing kind of works a little bit like it's a conversation between the test taker and what's going on behind the scenes, right? The algorithm. And so there are a couple of different types of adaptive testing. There are two main ones, and I'll sort of try to ease into both of those. So at the highest level, after each response, the system sort of is able to re-estimate an ability and then select the next question that's going to be the most informative. And then behind the scenes, it is continuously recalibrating those questions until it gets to a reliable estimate of a certain skill level, which is why really adaptive tests can measure ability more precisely with fewer questions. And so when a test adapts in real time, it's constantly going through this refresh process by estimating ability based on how somebody responds, and each answer gives them feedback that feeds into a process, into the background that updates that skill level and that estimate, and then it picks the next question that is the most informative for where you seem to be on a scale. And so it's using models like item response theory to kind of continuously balance and rebalance that challenge and that accuracy. So again, if you get a question right, next one's going to be a bit harder. If you miss one, the next one's going to be a little bit easier. And that process, it's an iterative process, and it continues until the system reaches a confident measure of an ability. And that's really what it's getting at. So the result feels that it's a little bit more personalized. And that's kind of what we were introducing before, is going from the macro to the micro, and each person gets a different path through the item pool. But it's really cool because the final scores are comparable across forms, because all items are, they're calibrated and they're designed to be on the same scale. And so it's all based on difficulty, right? So if, again, there's this process that's meant to be informative for where a certain ability sits.
Right.
And it's, it's just a way of being able to offer a personalized experience for the test taker in a way that is still, valid and reliable and fair.
Listen, do you envisage basically an increasing demand on the part of awarding bodies, professional exam boards, for this kind of modality, for the CAT modality? Do you see that happening over the next few years, or because I know some exams they went backwards. I mean, they remained digital, but they were more or less emulating the paper-based version. Because they had issues with the CAT modality. But you envisage an increase in this kind of format?
I do, and there's all sorts of signs that kind of point to that being the case. And I
Mm.
mean, in my, I can only speak to my experience working with uh, different certification and licensure bodies that, yeah, computer adaptive testing was sort of the next stepping stone from paper-based assessments.
Mm.
And I mean, it sort of goes back to, the 1970s with the development of the OSCEs, right? Where those were objective structured clinical examinations. For those that aren't familiar with the phrasing, but those types of assessments were meant to be kind of real-time simulated experiences that went beyond paper pencil-based administration. And so again, there's an even bigger shift from computer adaptive testing to something called linear on the fly testing. And we can get into that if you want to. But in my experience, I've only seen companies and licensure bodies and organizations focus on how they can improve that test taking experience and how they can improve the validity of the assessments
Yeah.
while offering a more dynamic way of taking the test. But the biggest hurdle there is that it's not a binary or dichotomous practice anymore. Whereas it could be easier to design a test based on multiple choice questionnaires where it's 1-0, right, wrong, pass, fail, high or low. But, as we get more sophisticated with the types of exercises that we're baking into the process of psychometrics, I think the way that the test construction process is going to be kind of a little bit more challenging to navigate in that way because we have to think beyond just a binary framework.
Right. Well, look, you're going to have to help us because with our own platform, Smart Test Examiner, currently we don't have, the computer adaptive modality. But we do have, clients who've been requesting it. So I think the time is right for you to give us a hand with that.
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
And it's the kind of thing you do. So that would be great.
Yeah,
So
more
look,
than happy to. Yeah.
sorry?
More than happy to. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, next one. Okay, I think maybe you've touched on this one already, but only in part, possibly.
Mhm.
Okay, so we often hear that analytics can unlock deeper insights. Could you share an example of how combining psychometric data with analytics has led to better decision making in education, HR, or research?
Yeah. Yeah. So I've spent some time sort of thinking about this idea and just the rhetoric behind. I feel the phrase of unlocking deeper insights or unlocking potential. It kind of it's used as a sometimes a knee-jerk sort of phrasing or a cliche. So when we talk about analytics or unlocking deeper insights, it implies that understanding in the way that is sometimes used, it's inaccessible without certain tools or frameworks. So you need this concrete thing, the tool that's being provided to access the abstract deeper levels. So there's this benefit of being able to offer something tangible for the intangible, something that doesn't need to be that concrete or defined. But in psychometrics, insight, that the idea of insight isn't really hidden inside the data waiting to be opened, right? It's sort of constructed through interpretation, and the unlocking sort of happens not really when the key turns, but when our framework for the understanding shifts. And psychometrics has the ability to reshape what we think we're looking for and how we look for it too. So in practice, then combining these models, these psychometric models with analytics allows for organizations to see a little bit beyond scores and patterns and learning engagement or decision making, like linking assessment data with performance that can reveal how people actually apply the skills over time longitudinally, not just how they test on them. There's a
Yeah.
lot of tests, a lot of teaching modalities do that too. They teach to the test, and I feel psychometrics is in a place where it wants to go a little bit beyond just teaching to the test, and that's where unlocking takes its the real meaning, not as a key or something to be sealed away, but as an act of reframing or revealing new dimensions of what ability and what potential mean. And there's actually a cognitive psychologist, Gary Klein, who I think phrased it perfectly. He defined an insight as an unexpected shift in how we understand things. And in the context of assessments, we can sort of also add to this and say it's kind of a reformulation of the familiar. And in terms of the analytical part, a good example comes from education analytics when schools combine scores with things like engagement or response patterns or response times and the amount of the assignment that was completed. They start to see why students are struggling and not just that they're struggling. And so
Yeah.
that sort of kind of harkens back to your early question about how this new way of creating tests can benefit the student as opposed to just, a new cool way of designing tests. And there, we can also talk about the implementation of certain models that combine psychometric data with contextual analytics, like teacher, school, demographic factors, things like that. And by analyzing those layers together, the things and systems can distinguish between individual student growth, again, that very personal kind of experience, and the institutional influence. And it gives them just a more nuanced insight into what schools, for example, within academia are genuinely improving on, and what what needed targeted support they need to implement.
Yeah.
Rather than simply, ranking performance in this kind of, binary way. That integration helps identify causal factors affecting achievement, and it kind of directs the resources towards interventions that can be effective and digestible and accessible by more students. And those models have shown to improve accountability and planning and all that when they're applied carefully with growth measures like formative feedback and policy level evaluations. So it has this real kind of trickle down effect when we think about that macro perspective of, okay, this is a new way of designing tests, and these are all the impacts that can then have at these different levels and at these different layers.
Sometimes I suppose we tend to look at psychometrics as something aloof and abstract, and a thing unto itself. But I mean, considering what you've just said, it is so interlinked with everything and so vitally important, really, if implemented in the right way and for the right purposes. It's really fascinating, I have to say. So my next question is, well, actually looking ahead, what emerging psychometric techniques or technologies do you think will have the biggest impact on online assessment in the next few years?
Okay, so again, in my work, I've been exposed to and think about this on a daily basis, and the thing that really comes to mind is the future is moving towards immersive and experiential and individual measurement.
Mm-hmm.
Technically immersive assessments, again, they date back as far as the 70s with the OSCEs, right? They provided a new way of assessing on a different, more experiential level that was meant to be more immersive. And they were designed to assess clinical skills in a more objective and reliable way, which is really fascinating because it also allowed for that subjective experience than traditional exams, which were, funnily enough, criticized as being less valid than more traditional exams. And so we can sort of get into the weeds here a little bit too. One of the major developments that I think is coming more and more into the forefront is automated scoring for long form written expression exams and tasks. So we can see that being implemented with Pearson in there. They have something called the Intelligent Essay Assessor, which is an automated scoring system that uses natural language processing and semantic analysis to evaluate written responses. So those kinds of things are becoming more sophisticated. Again, moving beyond the binary is, I think, the key takeaway from that. And what
Right.
the other, even going beyond that, when you start looking ahead, game-based gamification and virtual reality and augmented reality enabled based assessments are sort of seeping into the consciousness
So,
of how tests are designed as well, and being piloted, and they're already kind of proving to be a bit more predictive than of real world behavior than conventional tests. So
right.
it's about kind of, again, capturing these micro patterns, how people plan, adapt, or collaborate in authentic scenarios. And there's some great, fascinating work being done on the practice of telemetry and telemetric mobility. And essentially, what that is a it's a digital assessment administration method where a student is kind of placed in a virtual reality setting, and the idea is to measure and capture where in the room they navigate to first and how that informs the rest of their decisions, and how that can expand uh, behavioral evidence of reasoning and thinking, and how that can feed into all those different types of components. So it's very, that kind of thing is very fascinating compared to traditional adaptive tests that are kind of adjusting based on responses. And
Yeah. So,
it's very fascinating. And things are working more like a GPS now in terms of the models that are being used, kind of from a slightly more technical perspective. I mentioned item response theory. There's something called cognitive diagnostic modeling, which is, again, just another shift and another form of progress that I see more and more companies moving towards. And it doesn't just track distance or speed. It will, these new ways of measuring and assessing sort of map where somebody looks and how they took a wrong turn and which specific skills need correction and what route they might need to take next. And it's sort of, yeah, it's that continual iterative process of map learning in real time. And so I think that is another kind of a bit more of a technical way, but it's another way that it's another way in which things are kind of progressing and advancing.
right. Next question. For organizations that want to start applying psychometric principles to their online assessments, what practical steps would you recommend to get it right from the start?
Right. So, I mean, each new psychometric project and endeavor should start with a question. That is always what I tell everyone from the start is you have to have a research question, a valid and sort of something of interest that you want to explore. Make sure you know what the gap is that you're trying to bridge. Find a space in that conversation that you can infuse your idea and expand what you're trying to do and what the field is trying to do. And it's really kind of about clarity. So that's where it starts in terms of applying those psychometric principles. That's your starting line.
Right.
Knowing exactly what you're trying to measure and why. And a lot of people jump straight into item writing or the tech setup without nailing down the construct. So start by defining what success looks like for your assessment, I would say. The next thing is develop good data practices. It's not the most exciting thing to talk about, but data cleaning is crucial, very important. Pilot your items, gather solid response data, make sure you have a sample size that's big enough, make sure that sample represents the people that you're actually going to be assessing. Even small scale item analyses can give you a lot about what's working and what isn't.
Yeah.
And it's also worth leaning on existing frameworks and building on those, like classical test theory or item response theory at even a basic level, and they'll help you think more systematically about difficulty and how the items are discriminating between different groups, um, how fair they're behaving, how reliable they are. And
Yeah.
we also can't forget the human side too. Fairness is something I try to drive home a lot. Fairness, accessibility, and transparency. We often talk about validity and reliability, but fairness, I feel maybe less so now, but certainly when I was starting out, was not the main topic of conversation. It was all about validity and reliability and documenting your process, checking for biases, remembering that your delivery platform can impact the performance just as much as your test content, and getting those basics right kind of sets you up for a more meaningful, more scalable measurement down the line. I think that's a pretty good starting point to have.
Yeah, interesting what you said about the impact that the actual test delivery platform can have as opposed to the actual test content, which leads me to the question I said at the beginning is very close to my heart, because we have a testing platform, test delivery platform, which is also at the same time an authoring platform. And I said that, on our roadmap, there is also the computer adaptive modality. You also touched on AI scoring. Some of what we're looking at is precisely that, the computer adaptive modality. We're looking at item generation. We're looking at AI scoring, not only for the written format, but also voice capture and so on, because our platform is basically configured also for language tests. So it can basically, test the 4 skills. So the AI components are on our roadmap, as is the computer adaptive testing. But having said that, given where psychometrics and online assessment are heading, what advice would you give me with regard to our roadmap and how we should further develop our platform?
Yeah, to kind of.
Sorry, Marco, do we just throw it out the window and go for VR and an experiential modality, completely individualized, and each experience is unique for every person? I mean, where are we going? What should we be taking into consideration?
It really is a rabbit hole. I mean, you can do an entire course on it depends, entire workshops on answering your question with it depends. I'll try to be more helpful than that, though. I think a lot of the questions that come to mind when you say that, just to set things up, is, you mentioned the technology being an influence on the test taking experience. And to me, what comes to mind is, issues that come along with these kinds of developments with, let's say, AI generated items, like using publicly available large language models, let's say ChatGPT, for that purpose is not a good idea, I don't think. Because we can say, well, how can you guarantee it didn't draw the item from copyrighted material? How can you guarantee it didn't somehow stumble on items from another similar assessment? How can you guarantee your items won't be used by ChatGPT when someone else asks a similar prompt when developing their own assessment? And so the real question being asked is of the ethical considerations around automating things and developing things that really should involve the human element. And the roadmap question really comes down to balancing continuity with reinvention. So
Hmm.
I'm kind of taking both, having my cake and eating it too, sort of thing. I don't think we should scrap everything. There certainly is a time and a place for that, but we've built such strong platforms around item banking and analytics and adaptive testing. But what is coming more and more into the forefront now, what's really emerging is new kinds of ecosystems where measurement isn't confined to multiple choice formats or single setting assessments. And I think it's a question about what you want to act as a supplement and what you want to act as the primary driver. So artificial intelligence and automation and VR and AR and gamification are enabling far more fluid context aware forms of evaluation where that emphasis sort of shifts from selecting an answer to demonstrating understanding within the dynamic environments.
Hmm.
So we're already getting these limitations of traditional multiple choice formats. Studies comparing MCQs to directly answered formats like very short answer questions could be a good bridge between MCQs and emerging technologies that have
Yeah.
shown that MCQs offer reliability and scalability, which is great. They often do so, however, at the expense of validity and depth. So there's all sorts of considerations to take into account that reward recognition over reasoning, and their predictability can sort of drive that rote learning rather than genuine, sincere understanding. So it's about kind of striking that balance. Direct response formats, by contrast, sort of give us the ability to see how people think, and we want to continue doing that. We want to see how people think, and not just what they can recall. They
Yeah.
get richer psychometric data, distribute scores more evenly. They give educators and decision makers more accurate senses of strengths, weaknesses, myths, misconceptions. The biggest thing that comes to mind is how to develop systems that are going to scale these assessments, because I will say psychometrics sort of rely it it does kind of rely on a sort of templatable and templated method where it kind of works best if you know how to work with it in that kind of right wrong binary dichotomous framework, where it's easier to develop tests that way. But there's going to be a lot of, if we continue developing tests that are increasingly more technology focused and individually focused, it's definitely going to be the main challenge. I think a challenge definitely worth exploring and worth extrapolating, but I feel like that would be the biggest challenge. And what that tells us in the next phase of testing is going to be about moving out from that recognition to the construction, from choosing answers to articulating and applying knowledge in the context that it's meant to. So VR and AR environments, simulations, and these kind of sandbox style assessments extend that same logic that allow people to choose behavior and the decision making and
Yeah.
adaptability in these more complex lifelike scenarios, right? Which is just an expansion of those OSCEs of what was started, decades and decades ago. So I think multiple choice questions, getting back to your trying to stay on track, is they'll still have a place. They do remain the most efficient format with a lot of caveats, but they do remain the most efficient format for certain constructs, I would say. But their long-term shelf life depends on how well we're going to integrate them into hybrid models that
Right.
combine those elements. So I think, as with everything, I think a hybrid model is going to be the way to go. It depends what the main thrust and focus and drive is going to be. I think our roadmaps should evolve from being static implementation to the systems that adapt alongside the technologies and the psychometrics that support them. Computer adaptive testing and linear on-the-fly testing, those are ways in which the field is evolving, and I think it should continue going down that route. So the way that the field is evolving is, from my perspective, has been from the test construction perspective as opposed to the test taking experience. It certainly affects the test taking experience, but I think we should put more and more in the forefront what the user is and the student is able to get out of that experience. And it means, again, using process data and response times and strategies and different patterns of hesitation or what have you as part of the validity argument. So part of what's going to be a challenge as well is expanding the validity and reliability argument is going to be kind of ever evolving and more dynamic. And it kind of means seeing the testing ecosystem less as a set of instruments, I think, and more as a continuous spectrum, because psychometrics has moved from being static to spectrum, I think, with evidence-rich dialogue and conversations between the learner and the system itself. And I don't think the future is going to be about replacing what we have, but about, again, expansion of what we can measure in terms of not just outcomes, but through the process itself. And it's going to be about the outcomes for the test itself and outcomes for the students. So it's important to have that symbiotic relationship, however that's done. I hope I answered your question somewhere.
No, you did. And in fact, I'll be coming back to you, as I said, to we will want to demo our platform to you, so we can make sure that the platform evolves in accordance to best practices, for the best possible future trends and so on. And so you can be sure that. And in fact, I can't wait for you to see our platform.
I can't wait either. Yeah, it sounds very exciting.
Yeah. And so, but on that note, I think we've run out of time. It was absolutely fascinating. Yeah, it's already 3/4 of an hour. Yeah, how time
I feel like
flies.
I just logged on.
Yeah, and it was a real pleasure. It was fascinating listening to you. And I'll actually be watching a recording as well to go through all that again, because that was a lot of information to unpack.